I'm Andrea Davis. I'm a senior at Simmons and I'm a communications major. I realized when I was probably 4 or 5, I remember a specific time when I was in Disney World with my family, and I just remember looking at women more than I knew I should have been. Um, it was just kind of odd to me, and I just went back home and like I knew from my friends that I was friends with in the neighborhood that, they liked boys and I was kind of more interested in girls and I didn't really understand why. I really kind of figured it out, I think, probably when I was 6. My sister tells me this story when I was that young, and we were all sitting at the dinner table, and I just announced out of nowhere that I was a lesbian. And my parents just kind of like stopped and they looked at me, and my dad turned to me and he asked me if I knew what that was. And I just looked at him. I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, tell me. And I was like, well, it's when another woman loves a woman. And he's like, okay. And he's like, well, do you think that's you? And I was just like, yeah. And I just went back to eating like my spaghetti and meatballs or whatever like we were having for dinner. And I don't think it was taken that seriously, but um, I definitely knew for sure, obviously. First, I was kind of, I was like a tomboy when I was younger. I only like played sports and I hung out with boys a lot. And I didn't really have a lot of girlfriends. Um, and at school, like people would kind of make fun of me, but there's one moment in my life that I remember when I was probably 11 or 12, and I had just gotten to junior high, and it was very scary junior high because it was like all these older kids that were so mean to you for no reason, and the bus was exceptionally um, like horrible because I just remember feeling terrified to take it, and I would try to sit like in the middle, like a neutral area. But this one day, like I was sitting kind of towards the back near like the eighth graders, and I was talking to my friends, and I was like fine, I was in a good mood, and then a bunch of them in the back just like quieted down the entire bus, and they asked me if I wanted a sex change, and I remember like just looking at them and not knowing what to say and not knowing what to do, and all my friends are staring at me and everyone's just kind of like laughing, and all I could do was just like be quiet, wait to get off the bus. And when I got off the bus, I like my whole body just felt so heavy, and I couldn't pick my head up the whole way to my house. And I was just so embarrassed and so hurt, and I couldn't even like tell my mom or my sister. Um, and I just remember like feeling really awful about that moment because it was such like a personal thing for me to, know that I'm gay, and for someone to like call me out and just make me feel really like, you know, embarrassed in that situation. And that's not who I am, and just really like make it a very awkward moment. And yeah. I came out 3 times. I came out once when I was 6, and then I came out again when I was 8. I was having a lot of like dark periods in my childhood. I remember like being really sad because I was internalizing so much about my sexuality and just having to be quiet and like to having to keep it in and not tell anybody. My sister knew, but that was just kind of like our relationship. Like we shared everything. But at this point in my life, I was in 3rd grade, and I, sitting in the living room with my mom, and I was just really upset, and I was really sad, and she asked me, she's like, well, what's wrong? Like, what's bothering you? I can tell that like you're really upset. And I didn't actually like come out and say it, but she just like, she's like, I know. She's like, I know like what's going on. And I just kind of shook my head, and I didn't want to talk because I knew I'd start crying. And she was just like really comforting and really loving about it. And then we just didn't talk about it again. And I didn't want to talk about it again because my sister had told me that my dad told my mom that I didn't know what I was talking about. And so that just made me not want to have like any kind of conversation like that with them again. Until a couple years later, when I was 15, I had just started high school, and it was the end of the year, and I had met this girl, and she became my girlfriend, and we spent every single day together, and so my parents, I think that they had an idea, but I remember being in the kitchen with my sister. I was like making toast or something, and she was just, looking at me. She's like, Mom and Dad know. And I was like, I just stopped because I was terrified. And I was like, well, what did they say? And she's like, well, I don't know. You're gonna have to talk to them. And so later that day, I remember talking to my mom, and she was asking me. She's like, so you're girlfriends? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, it's okay. And I was, just like really nervous. And she's like, I still love you. And, she's like, I've always known. She's like, you were such a weird little girl. Like, I always like had an idea. And I was like, yeah, thank God. But, one thing I always really appreciate about my parents is that they've really like, they never pressured me to come out. It was just always like me like being loud and announcing it, or, me like having a girlfriend and it being obvious. And they kind of did it, I think, in the best way for me, because if they hadn't, I probably wouldn't have come out till college, and that would have just been like really horrible. But I still had to face my dad, and I didn't know what he was going to say because I was always afraid about what his reaction was going to be. But later that night, I was going over to my girlfriend's house, and we were in his truck together, and he just started talking to me, and was like, I don't care if you're gay. It's like, I still love you the same. I think, you're an amazing young woman, and I'm so proud of you. And, I was just like, thank you, because I like wanted to cry. It meant so much to me. I'd never had that kind of relationship with my dad where we really understood each other. And, now that I don't have to harbor the secret anymore and I can just be myself, it felt so good. When I was in junior high, I was friends with like all girls for some reason at that point in my life, because I just think like growing up with boys, and like I have two best friends that are guys, and we kind of like push each other away in that like weird like pre-puberty stage of junior high. And I was friends with like all like the girls who played like basketball and soccer, and we would always hang out, and they would ask me, they'd be like, well, why don't you have a boyfriend? And I was like, well, because I like girls. But, they would ask me questions, and I'd be like, I just don't. And then once they would keep asking me, I'd be like, okay, like, I'm going to tell you, but don't freak out. And then they would. And then towards the end of junior high and into high school, I just like lost all of them. They were really like weird about it, and they were uncomfortable with it because that's what they told me. And they were not really okay with it. And so I had no friends for a little while, and I felt really, really alone and just abandoned by people who I thought I considered friends. And then, my two other best friends, who I had actually told when I was 8 years old that I was gay, we started to, talk again, and they're really just like the best people that I know. And then as I had a girlfriend, my first girlfriend, I think that everyone just kind of assumed. So I didn't really have to like announce it or come out to like the people I was in high school with, but it was just assumed that I was. Especially when I was probably like 13 or 14, I think that was really the darkest period of my life. It was just a really strange time, and I didn't really want to be alive because I felt like I was internalizing everything, and no one really understood me, no one knew me, and I didn't want to live like that. And when I would and I try to reach out, I was losing people because they were really uncomfortable with, who I am. And my parents didn't know. My sister and my parents weren't really on good terms, so I like would hardly see her. So the one person that I did have who knew wasn't really around, and I just had to deal with it on my own. And there were many nights where I really, really wish that I just didn't have to deal with it anymore. I would have missed my entire college career. I would have missed playing music with my two best friends. That was such like an important and really great period of my life, just like playing music and doing that with them and having a really great time. I would have missed all the great relationships that I've gained with friends, with like my other, past girlfriends, and just the relationship now that's grown with my family. And once my grandmother found out, we've had such a great relationship because, we know each other so much more, and she has absolutely no problem with it, and she's so supportive. So I really would have missed those important relationships. Right now, I go to a great college. I love all my friends. I'm doing what I want to do. I have a great relationship with my family, and my grandmother. That's really important to me. Someone now who's dealing with this, and I think about it too. Just the advice that I gave myself was to be yourself and to not change for anyone's comfortability. No matter how hard it gets, you need to be that person, and to just know that if you're in a really small town and no one understands you and you don't really have anyone, that you just have to like push on and know that it will get better, because there are people that you will meet and that you will know that are going to love you and accept you for who you are.